That time I nearly destroyed the world whilst looking for a dress. By Joseph Lidster. Start crying. Weep for all the miseries that are coming to you. Your wealth is all rotting and your clothes are all eaten up by moths. All your gold and silver are corroding away, and the same corrosion will be your own sentence and eat into your body. It was a burning fire that you stored up as your treasure for the last days. James 5, 1-3. Oh, darling, all the Millennium stories have to start with a quote from the Bible, don't they? Add to the whole drama of the thing, the last days. Of course, we now know that the world didn't end at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve 1999. There was no Y2K, no Armageddon. To be honest, it didn't even change much. Well, except for in the minds of us Western folks with our desperate longing to be a part of history. Newsreaders, some young, blonde and pretty, others older, stern and authoritative, winked excitedly at us as they proclaimed that this moment will live on in history. Their radio voices and television faces comforted us and excited us as they told us that we were special because we were here and we were now and we were living in this historical, unforgettable moment of historical importance. And the thing, you see, is that I actually wasn't there. I really had become a part of history. I really had become history. How, you ask? Had that strange and fabulous little man with his time-travelling police box whisked me off to the building of the Great Wall of China, or to the tearing down of that not-so-great wall in Berlin, or to any of those other moments in history? No. No, darling. I met God at a celebrity funeral, and she sent me through time to look for a dress. Have you got a light? Remember when we all gave up in the 80s? Thank God smoking's back in. So anyway, it's difficult to know where to begin telling your story when you've been history itself. Do I tell it in a historically chronological order, or do I tell it in the order that I experienced it? Either way, the continuity is going to be buggered. I suppose, darling, I should start with introducing myself. My name's Polly. You might recognise me from such magazines as Hello, OK, Heat. You remember? Music mogul Polly Wright shows us her exquisite gazebo. Or those pictures of me putting my shopping into the car at Sainsbury's. No, not your sort of thing? Oh, well. I was born in... Oh, you know all about my early life and what I got up to in the 60s. You know all about how I travelled through time and space with a renegade beetle known only as the Doctor. Of course you do. So when in my life, in my personal history, did you get up to? When I had that job interview at GEZ? Oh, well, I got the job. Yes, it was back in 92 when I became the PA to John Maurice. Didn't like him much. Actually, darling, didn't like him at all. He was a full-time charisma vacuum, but I loved the job. After husband number 1 died, I realised how much I'd changed. I'd always been the life and soul. My friends used to say it to me all the time. Holly dear, you're the life and soul. In the 60s, I was the glamour girl, and of course the sexy time traveller. In the 70s, I was the queen of disco. In the 80s, well, it became all mortgages, salads, and cricket matches. Simon had managed to bore the Polly out of Polly. The job for GEZ brought me back. I was at all the showbiz parties and knew simply everyone. For 4 years, I was Polly Wright socialite. Then, in 96, tragedy struck. Take That split up. Their fans were devastated, of course, and one fan, in grief-fueled desperation, turned to Mr. Maurice for support. She was, you might say, very energetic in her grief, and he did his best, but his heart simply wasn't in it. I found him in a hotel room with a tangerine in his mouth and a piglet licking ice cream from his toes. A video of Maid Marian Does the Merry Men was stuck on the infamous Feeding the Poor scene, and a 19-year-old in a Gary Barlow t-shirt was stuck under the once famous Mr. Maurice. His wife thanked me for keeping the story out of the tabloids by signing GEZ over to me. Naturally, I was overjoyed. And so, for the next few years, I ran GEZ. Darling, we represented anyone who was anyone in the music industry. We signed up lesbian, trio, girls, 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 and shock rockers, Slice the Animals. I was personally responsible for 42 number one hits in 1998 alone. And of course, my profile grew immensely. No party was complete without Polly. Like Adina, Kylie, and Tara, I had become so important that I no longer needed a surname. I was at the opening of the Dusk, the Rapture, and the Envelope. I had a brief marriage to the gay one out of Boys, and had well-publicised struggles with the booze and bulimia. Which was all well and good. But, sweetie, there was really only one party to be seen at back in the 90s. The celebrity funeral. Guaranteed to get your face in the paper. I was at Versace's, comforting Diana, and Diana's, comforting Elton. As H from Steps said when he collected his Mobo Award, from death comes life. Mascara running, brave smile, front page picture, mark on history, proof I exist. And it was at one of these funerals that my life changed once more. Do you remember Jane Vapid? Used to present Crime It Can Pay, one of those ghastly reconstruction programs where members of the public are paid to solve real-life crimes. Anyway, back in April 1999, as she was leaving Great Ormond Street Hospital, where she'd been giving jelly babies to kids with AIDS, she was shot dead. At first, we all feared it was a revenge attack because of the programme she presented. Headlines screamed, "The Hitman and Her." Naturally, we were then disappointed to discover that the guy who killed her was merely a stalker. I mean, a stalker? We all had one of those. Mine was a lovely young estate agent from Tunbridge Wells. Nowhere near as exciting or historical. Still, the public were devastated. The same renter crowd that had lined the streets of London when Diana died, when Labour got in, when Posh and Becks married, lined the streets once more. Headlines screamed, "The People's Presenter murdered." Oh, sorry, darling, am I rambling? Well, to get to the point, GEZ were commissioned to do Jane's official tribute song, a re-release of Fine Young Cannibals' She Drives Me Crazy. So, luckily, I got to go to the funeral. There I was, sweating under the studio lights like a perv at a school disco, in my black Stella McCartney number and Jimmy Choo's, watching as the coffin was brought down the aisle of Westminster Abbey. I looked around at my colleagues and friends from the industry, all of us with the same "I'm grief-stricken but immaculately made up" look on our faces. All of us thinking about the next day's papers, all of us hoping to hear Terry Wogan mention our names on the TV commentary. An army of clones desperately gasping for oxygen in that great hall of history, craving existence as the second millennium careered towards its last days. And, as the coffin was river-danced to the end of its journey, the cameras began to flash. White light exploding in our faces, white light blinding the blondes, white light, white... And then for the briefest second, I saw a bomb exploding during a fairy tale wedding, and the Queen Mum's severed head flying towards me. And darling, I'm not too sure what happened next. But I felt something like an elastic band snap in my head. I remember someone saying, "Give her the kiss of life." And that's it. The blondes became as still as the stone statues of the kings and queens of history that surrounded them. And time froze, and I lay still, and all was silent. Then she appeared, wearing a Lacroix sequin trouser suit and a tinsel halo, smiling down at me as she descended through the ceiling. I could hear a choir of cherubs harmonizing as white light emanated from her smile like a bad toothpaste commercial. Then she too became still as she stood before me. "Polly, sweetie, how the devil are you?" she asked, reaching behind and switching off a CD player. The harmonizing was halted. I stuttered for a while and then told her that actually I was a bit confused. I asked her who she was. "I might be any number of things," she announced dramatically. Her voice was odd, like a mixture of a man's and a woman's. I might be an angel or a devil. I might be a wicked witch annoyed that she wasn't invited to the party. I might be... Are you God? I interrupted. Yeah, God. That's me. Oh. So am I dead then? Possibly? Her voice began to rise again. Perhaps you are, perhaps you're not, perhaps... Don't milk it, darling. Why are you here? Very well, she yawned. Well, I'm a bit bored, really. I'm going to let you into a secret. She leant towards me and whispered, The world isn't going to end on New Year's Eve. I was, naturally, still very confused. So? I want something to happen. So much has happened in the last few thousand years. Mankind has achieved so much. But look at you now, you've stalled. You used to fight wars against dictators and injustice. The biggest war you fight now is against the telltale signs of aging. It's like you all think that just because we're reaching the end of millennium, well, that's enough. The clocks are going to turn, the book's going to end, so let's not even bother anymore. And I want to shake things up a bit. How? By giving you what you want. I'm going to make sure that this millennium is something to remember. You're here to give me what I want. Yep, I'm the genie in the bottle, the fairy godmother, Scylla Balak. You're here to give me a new liver. There was a pause. Obviously not. I began to think about what else I wanted. Darling, there's no need to think. You want the perfect dress. I laughed. Sorry? Oh, for the party you're going to on New Year's Eve, the celebrity fancy dress thing at Edinburgh. You want to be the picture on the front page. Then suddenly she whispered into my ear, You want that extra day of life. I'm not that shallow, I replied. There are other more important... Wait, you're going to give me a dress? Oh, yeah, that would be like so much fun. No, Polly, I'm sending you through time. I'm going to let you find the perfect dress. I'm taking you shopping. Suddenly, she spun me round, kissing me on the lips and whispered, Happy New Year. Her voice trailed off as my world, my story, changed. I was in a tunnel, a vortex. Shapes moved in weird and wonderful ways as the colours, so many colours, coalesced and grew out of each other. I felt my eyes being drawn out of my head as I flew through the impossible light. It was beautiful. It was unearthly. It was just like the screensaver on my laptop. And as the colours began to bleed into white, as my impossible journey began to end, thousands of years before and a few seconds after it began, I heard God's voice. Find it, Polly Wright. Find what you need. From death, find life. The voice raised into a screech as the white overloaded my senses, and then... silence. I woke up in a dark room with straw sticking up my nose. It wasn't the first time, so I didn't panic. Darling, I know a dungeon when I smell one. Still, it wasn't exactly comfortable, especially with my face pressed up against the stone wall. I started to stretch when suddenly I heard a voice behind me. Hello? It simpered. I managed to grunt a response. Are you a messenger from our Lord? I tried not to stifle a laugh as I turned to face her. No, darling, my name's Polly. What's yours? I am... She cut off as we looked at each other. It was like looking in a mirror. We were nearly identical. I am the Lady Marian, she managed to stutter before fainting. I stood up and looked down at her. She really did look like a younger me. And what with the surgery, so did I. It was remarkable. And she had a dress to die for. So that's why God had sent me here, the perfect dress. It was green and tight-fitting and, of course, medieval in design. I was about to kneel down and try and wake her when suddenly I heard footsteps outside the cell door. For a moment I panicked, then figured, what the hell, I might as well find out where I am. I cautiously headed over towards the door when suddenly 2 faces appeared at the bars. One was a bloke, quite fit in an old-fashioned 50s movie star kind of way, and the other was a young, dark-haired girl. We all looked a bit startled, and then the bloke spoke. "Hello? Who are you?" "Paul, the Lady Marian," I replied. "Who are you?" He introduced himself as Ian Chesterton, and his companion as Susan. "We've been, travelling, and we seem to have lost track of time. Can you tell me what year it is?" he asked. Bugger. I didn't want to get caught out, so I explained that I'd been in prison for so long that I no longer knew what the year was. The girl was all perky and eager. "Oh, Mr. Chesterton, we have to rescue her." While I appreciated the sentiment, her voice immediately began to grate. She was like an excitable chihuahua. "Stand back from the door," he announced dramatically. I stepped back, nearly tripping over the real Marion, as he attacked the door with his shoulder. It didn't budge. "Oh, Mr. Chesterton, are you all right?" simpered Susan. "I'll be fine, Susan," he rubbed his shoulder. "That door is sturdier than it looks." "Grandfather might have something in the top—" She trailed off as she looked at me. "He might have something in our travelling caravan." She looked strangely proud. Good, I thought. "Off you toddle then, Susan." "I'll go," replied Ian. "You wait here and keep the Lady Marian company." Double bugger, I thought, as he ran down the corridor. I smiled politely at Susan. "Why did they imprison you?" shrieked the girl in an unnecessarily high-pitched voice. Before I had time to answer, she continued, "Grandfather says we shouldn't interfere with history, but he wouldn't leave you here to rot. He's gone to the village with Miss Wright." "Miss Wright? But, darling, I'm Miss Wright." "Lady Marian, right?" She looked confused. Right." Suddenly, all hell broke loose as Ian came running back. "Susan, we're trapped," he announced breathlessly. 2 armed guards with swords appeared. "The sheriff wants to see you," said one to Ian. Susan screamed so loudly that even Ian looked annoyed at his friend. Me? I was ready to slap her. I had never screamed whenever I had been captured by guards or mercenaries. As Ian and Susan were led away by the guards, I sat down. What now? I'm not sure whether I fell asleep, but everything seemed to fade to black and then fade up again. Marian was now sat on the pile of straw in the corner, and I was sat on the other side of the cell. "Has our Lord sent you, Mistress Polly?" "Well, kind of, but not in the way you think." "Oh, have I finally succumbed to the hunger? Does our Lord want me to sit by his side in heaven? You are my angel?" Jesus, I was surrounded by girls who needed a slap. "No, I'm just passing through, doing a bit of shopping." "What is shopping?" This girl didn't know what shopping was. What kind of godforsaken hellhole of a time was this? I just hope they had gin. "Why don't you tell me about yourself?" And you know what, darling? I actually found myself becoming interested in her story. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually been that interested in anyone else, but here, away from everything, I found myself being drawn into her tale. It turns out she was Maid Marian, as in Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest and all that. I tried not to think of the film I'd found playing in Mr. Maurice's hotel room. But get this, Robin's a bit of a sod, really. The way Marian spoke about him, you'd think he was a saint. By the sounds of it, he treated her like crap. And yet, She loved him. For the briefest of moments, I tried to remember the last time I'd felt, "But he's a good man, really." She interrupted my thoughts. "Marion, he's sleeping with every wench in the village." "But he loves me. He says everything he does it for me." I told her about life where I was from, although I substituted the 20th century for God's kingdom. Perhaps, I figured, this is also why God sent me here. Not just for a dress, but to actually make a difference. I came over all Germaine Greer as I explained to her that she was a person in her own right, and, I think it started to sink in. Then I suggested we should try and escape. "Perhaps we should swap dresses. Let them think that I'm you. I needed that dress." "Should we not wait for one of the men?" she trailed off, her eyes suddenly sparkling with life. "Perhaps I could suggest to one of the guards that I would like to hold his sword." I laughed at her suddenly brazen attitude. I was beginning to like this girl. "Marion!" shouted a voice from the door. We both looked up. It was Ian. "Robin!" shrieked Marion. "Marion!" shrieked Susan, her head popping up next to Ian's, Robin's. "That's Robin?" I tried desperately not to shriek. "But he looks like Mr. Chesterton!" shrieked Susan, her voice about to break the sound barrier. And she finally shut up as she noticed Marion stood next to me. "Marion, you wench!" exclaimed Robin. "Why, there be two of you now! What larks we shall have!" "Oh, Robin!" cried Marion. Robin booted down the door. And I have to admit, darling, that at this point even I could see the attraction. He swaggered in with Susan scampering along beside him. "Isn't it wonderful?" she squealed. "He's Robin Hood." "Yes, I gathered," I replied. Being the nearest Marion, Robin approached me first. "Well, if it bain't been my Lady Marion, your imprisonment hasn't been good to your pretty face." By now, I'd had enough of the whole situation. I was in a cell in medieval England, obviously caught up in someone else's story. I had a girl next to me, my double, simpering away with Susan about how wonderful and brave this bloke was. And now Robin Hood was denigrating my looks. God, what had I done to deserve this? Okay, don't answer that. We don't have all night. Robin leered at me and lurched in for a kiss. I quickly brought my knee up, and down he went, clutching his crown jewels, just as a sword swished through the air where his neck had been. "My lady, you have saved my life," he wheezed. The guard who had appeared with the sword regained his balance and prepared to thrust the sword down, when Marion suddenly spun him around and punched him out cold. "Take that, you overbearing male chauvinist pig!" shouted Marion, blowing on her clenched knuckles. For a few seconds we all stood there. Then the silence was broken by a slow clapping. A man entered the room. "Perhaps I should have you join my men at arms." Marion immediately backed away. "The Sheriff of Nottingham, I presume." I didn't know what was going on, but I was pretty certain who had been holding Marion prisoner. "That is indeed who I am," he replied, not quite twirling his moustache. "And who are you that shares the aspect of the Lady Marion? Two Marions, what conspiracy is this?" "I might very well ask the same question myself," said another voice. A voice I recognized. The doctor! He entered the cell with Ian Chesterton. "Apothecary," snarled the sheriff. "I demand you return to your to what you have promised me you can achieve." Like me, he was desperately trying to keep some control over the situation. I nearly blurted out the doctor's name, but decided not to. He looked like he did when we had first met, and I figured it might be dangerous to change his past. "And who is this?" demanded the sheriff, looking down at the winded Robin. "I am Robin of Sherwood," he tried to proclaim. "But this man here," the sheriff indicated Ian, "he is Robin of Sherwood." "He's not the real Robin," I announced, still determined not to shriek. The doctor replied, "Well, of course he isn't, madam." He clutched urgently at the lapels on his jacket. "Don't you think we don't know that? Now, perhaps you'd like to explain what you're doing here, hun?" "God knows," I replied. I didn't like the way he was looking at me, as if he'd already met me, which was, of course, impossible, I think. "Grandfather!" shrieked Susan. "There are two Marians, and Mr. Chesterton look like Robin Hood. I don't understand. I'm frightened, Grandfather." "Shush, child. I think we can all see what's happened here." There was a pause as we all turned to the doctor. "It's quite obvious, really, but I wouldn't expect any of you to understand." There was another pause. "Well, Doctor?" asked Ian impatiently. We all stared at the doctor just as the air in the room shimmered and a girl appeared. She was looking down at her feet and talking. "Timmy, stop licking me. I said—" She trailed off as she looked up and around. "Oh, where are the smugglers?" She turned and saw the doctor. "Grandfather?" There was a suitably dramatic pause, and then the doctor spoke. "Susan?" For some unearthly reason, I wasn't that surprised by the appearance of yet another double, but my brain gave up on trying to understand. As both Susans began to scream, I felt something in my head snap. The cell and its occupants began to fade away, and I felt myself being drawn once more into the vortex. As I hurtled once more through the tunnel of colour, I hoped I hadn't messed up history, and more importantly, I hoped I would be able to get a decent dress from wherever next I ended up. Flash! And then you arrived in a period known as the 1930s. Well, so I thought, darling. How did you know? You sent this. I believe it's known as a letter. That wasn't meant for you. It was meant for... Ben, I don't know why I'm choosing to write to you, but just in case I don't get out of here, I want you to know where I ended up. Darling, it's a long story, but I seem to be stuck shooting around through time. Not sure how or why, but I've just travelled from medieval England to the 1930s. Some town called Keelmouth? It's very pretty in a simple kind of way. All beaches and old people in deck chairs eating ice cream. Right up your street. Anyway, I'm meant to be looking for a dress, but all I seem to have done is caused a bit of a stir. I know, not like me at all. So I arrived here a few hours ago and was bursting for a pee. I couldn't find a loo anywhere, but did manage to find myself a B&B. Have to be honest, wasn't exactly the Hilton, but at least it was clean. Mrs. Hutchins, the old woman who owned it, welcomed me with open arms as she thought I'd add a touch of class to the place, which was nice. I decided to book a room as I wasn't sure how long I'd be stuck in the 30s. You know how it is. So there I was in my room when I heard a boy coughing. I stuck my head into the corridor and saw one of the residents leaving the boy's room. I'd met him earlier, a Mr. Prentice. He didn't see me, which suited me as I'd already noticed that there was something odd about him. When he went downstairs, I wandered over to the boy's room and peeked in. He'd stopped coughing. In fact, he was laughing at something. It was all a bit of a mystery, and I was about to return to my room when I heard footsteps coming back up the stairs. It was Prentice, and he had the doctor with him. Yes, the doctor. Only he looked like he did when we first met him, before he changed, I mean. The doctor and Prentice were talking about the boy. Prentice was saying that he did genuinely care about the child, especially as he had once had a son himself. The doctor then told Prentice about his granddaughter, Susan, and about how he'd do anything to protect her. Ben, it made me think of Mikey. The doctor's eyes were full of sparkle and pride as he spoke about Susan. Apparently, they were inseparable. I thought about Mikey and his feelings towards me. I'd asked him to come to Edinburgh with me for the millennium. He had said he'd rather spend it with some people he cared about, and had gone to some rave in Jerusalem. I wonder if I'll ever see him again. So anyway, The doctor looked deeply upset as Prentice was telling him about how ill the boy, Craig, still appeared to be. Now, I know he was always going on at us about interfering with time, but I couldn't stand by and let the doctor have the wool pulled over his eyes. I introduced myself as a fellow guest and explained that actually Craig wasn't ill. The doctor tried to shush me as I showed them into Craig's room. Poor old sod really was concerned about the boy. Prentice continued to look shifty. I said that Craig was only pretending and that I thought that Prentice had put him up to it. And I was really angry. I'd never been the most maternal person, but Prentice was using the doctor's love for his grandchild to manipulate him somehow. I didn't know what Prentice wanted, but then he suddenly totally lost the plot. He started screaming at the doctor and yelling about messing him about. I started to back away as Prentice began to shout about how he was sick of people like the doctor interfering and about how he'd make him pay. He had some kind of metal box with flashing lights under his coat which he pulled out and began to wave around. He screamed about how the reversal would still happen, but not as the doctor wanted. "Your granddaughter," he screamed. "Leave Susan out of this," barked the doctor. "Too late," he shouted as he pressed one of the buttons. Some kind of laser shot out the box and through a nearby window. I instinctively ran towards Craig as the laser shot through the window and out towards an island just off the coast. "Now you'll know what it's like to lose someone," screamed Prentice. "Your granddaughter's been sent back to who knows when." The doctor suddenly lunged at Prentice with his walking stick and they began to struggle with the box. Laser beams started shooting out in all directions. I didn't know what was happening, but I'd hoped I'd done the right thing. At last, the doctor could see what Prentice was really like. The doctor tried to get me to help him, telling me that each of the beams was confusing the time streams. I ran towards the doctor when, flash! Never mind the time streams, I'm confused. How did I manage to post that letter? Your disruption of the timelines had already begun. They were in a state of blitz. Does that make any sense? To our temporal engineers it does, yes. Sounds like technobabble to me. So the doctor's granddaughter had been sent back to medieval England. That's where the second Susan came from. Except that because of your interference, that time period was already, in a state of flux. Blimey, darling, I really did mess up, didn't I? And tell me where you next remember arriving. Well, there were a few more short trips. Pompeii, the Galapagos Islands, Colditz, and then, well, this is what confused me, I'd been sent through time to look for a dress. So where is the last place you're going to look for fashion tips? I really wouldn't know. The 1980s! I mean, really? Did God want me to celebrate the millennium in leg warmers and pixie boots? Flash! I was watching a cricket match, as if things couldn't get any worse. Simon had always enjoyed it, but frankly, I didn't see the point in a sport where you couldn't see the player's thighs. Apparently, England were playing Australia, I think. To be honest, I'd never really understood it. I looked around for some reason why I might be here. I was starting to think that maybe God hadn't sent me on this journey just for a dress. Everywhere I'd been able to help. I'd saved Robin Hood's life. I'd shown the doctor what Mr. Prentice was really like. I'd helped some poor woman trapped in the wrong time in Colditz Castle. You gave Fraulein Klein your mobile telephone. And she was lost, trapped in the wrong time. And she reminded me of one of Simon's old boating chums from Tarrant. So she used the technology in the telephone to change history. Oh, and I suppose Germany won the war, did they? No, but they did win the 1966 World Cup. No way. Yes, way. Well, anyway, darling, so I was at this cricket match. Oh, it was all so frightfully English as we sat there politely oohing and ahhing under the grey sky. But you know what? I started to enjoy it. Not the game itself, still didn't have a clue what that was all about. In fact, it all seemed rather familiar. But I did begin to enjoy the whole Well, it was just relaxing. For the first time in ages, I wasn't on show. I could just sit back and relax. I actually started to think fondly of Simon, which was a first. Him and my life before GEZ. The sound of the ball hitting the bat, the hushed crowd, the terrible haircuts. No paparazzi, no plastic smiles, no postmodernism. Just a simple, dull, middle-class afternoon under an English sky. God bless the 80s. So there I was, trying to relax and just take a breather when these two young girls started pushing their way past us. Of course, being English, none of us said anything to begin with. There were a few tut-tuts and a few hardened stares, but mostly we waited for them to pass. All except for one man. The two girls reached the front of the stalls and I began to get this uncomfortable feeling, as if I'd been there before. I didn't know if it was the game, crowd, or the two girls, but something felt uneasy. They reached the edge of the field and began to talk to someone, and that's when a man shouted down at them. A man sat in a seat 2 rows in front of me. Simon. "Sit down, you're in the way." Simon. Husband number 1. And I suddenly realised why this all seemed so familiar. I was already there. Simon had dragged me there not long after we'd got married, and Simon, being Simon, hadn't put up with this disturbance to his nice, quiet English afternoon. There we were, me, pregnant with Mikey, him with his Daily Mail. And I watched as the same scene played out once more. The girls ignored him and carried on talking. "Hoi! Sit down, you're blocking the view." I felt the same embarrassment that I'd felt before. The girls carried on talking and I began to panic. I didn't know what to do. I knew changing the path was dangerous, so I figured I should just try and leave. I stood up and tried not to look forward. Cautiously, I began to edge down my row of seats. I watched as Simon began to clamber over his seats towards the girls. I watched myself stand up to defend him. I carried on edging towards the end of the row. This was getting harder and harder as more and more people were leaning forward to see what the commotion was. I heard my younger self shouting at the girls once more and continued my feverish sideways walk. I had just reached the end of the row when I heard my younger self shriek, "Old? Old? I'm scarcely middle-aged." And I stopped as I remembered how I'd felt. Pregnant, old before my time, disillusioned. It was at that very point that I'd started to feel unhappy with my life. It was that girl's very words that had set me on the path to a celebrity funeral in Westminster Abbey, 1999. "For a redwood tree?" sneered the young, pretty American girl to my younger self. As comebacks go, it hadn't been great, but the younger, unhappily married me hadn't known what to say back. "So you interfered with your own past?" Yes, I bloody well did. I started to clamber down over the rows of seats, falling over the middle-aged middle classes as I stumbled towards the girls. A steward was just approaching them when I practically fell at their feet. Standing up to my full height, I looked down at the American girl. I still didn't have that witty comeback, so I slapped her. She just stood there in shock as she looked from me to the younger me still in the stalls. Her companion wasn't so shocked, though, and she launched herself at me. We rolled onto the pitch, scratching at each other's faces. She was younger and tougher than me, but I'd fought my way into and out of enough club toilets to give as good as I got. I could just make out Simon as he stared, unable to comprehend how his wife was sat next to him, and yet also fighting on the grass in front of him. The American girl's friend managed to punch me in the face, so I headbutted her. Suddenly, a man dressed in some bizarre old-fashioned cricket uniform arrived at the scene. "Perry! Erimem, what's going on?" he asked breathlessly. "Doctor? You know these two?" It was the third girl, the one Perry and Erimem had been speaking to. "Ah, Tegan, yes, well, this could be rather awkward to explain. I managed to roll over and pin Erimem to the ground. Doctor? Not the doctor, I asked. Polly? He looked down at me, shocked. You know this she-devil? Asked Erimem as she rolled me over and pushed my face into the grass. Yes, she's an old... Oh, no, wait a minute. He quickly turned away from us and back to the match. Catch it, Dilly! He shouted at one of the cricketers. Like any of the men on the pitch were interested in anything other than the two women rolling around in the mud. The ball was soaring through the air and towards one of the fielders. He stood there staring at us as the ball shot past his face and clunked into the pitch. The doctor, well, this younger doctor, muttered under his breath, Perry, it's too late. History's been changed. He was facing the American girl. Both myself and the Australian girl, Tegan, asked him what was going on. Yes, I'd quite like to know as well, said a new voice. Of course, darling, it was another version of this doctor. Another double. Actually, darling, I don't mind if I do. Might be best if you kept your distance. The Blinovitch effect and all, began the doctor, the one who was stood next to Perry. Unfortunately, Erimem chose that point to fling herself off me. She carried into the new doctor, and he stumbled forward, straight into the arms of his other self. Oh, no. I'm not sure which one of them said this, as suddenly their faces began to open and light began to pour out. I scrabbled back away from the scene and began to feel the now familiar snap as the vortex began to fade into view. As the girls screamed and the doctors dissipated and the crowds began to trample, I stared into the eyes of my still and silent younger self. How had I come to... Thrash! And then, darling, I found myself in another field. Only this one was, well, a bit manky all round. And the weather was even worse than England. God, it was grim. Two men had their backs to me. One was a young lad whose hair really needed a wash and a cut, and who seemed to be wearing pyjamas. The other man was tall, big, muscly, and would have been quite tasty if it hadn't been for the fact that he was wearing an apron and had a beard that birds could nest in. The bigger man was playing with his huge weapon. He was holding it up and pointing it in the direction of the other. What am I supposed to do with this, Adric? The boy replied that it should be quite easy to use. It was just a case of gently moving your hand up and then letting go. We have to be careful, Mang. The doctor says we shouldn't be doing this. Apparently it could change the history of your primitive planet. He says we should try and make peace with the invaders. Peace? History will know of me as Mang the Merciless. I will not show them peace. They shall feel the power of my weapon. Mang was raising the bow and arrow when suddenly Adric noticed me. Who are you? He yelped. Mang panicked and swung around with the bow and arrow. In his fright, he released the arrow and it shot towards Adric. The boy tried to duck. Flash! That boy should have crashed a spaceship from the future onto prehistoric Earth. He would have wiped out the dinosaurs. Don't be... Oh, you're serious. Flash! I once pulled a sailor. I found myself on some kind of sailing ship. I didn't know what year it was, and darling, I didn't care. I had found booze and a drinking partner. Her name was Benny, and I think she was from the future as well, because some of the words that came out of her mouth would have made Prince Philip blush. We'd hit it off immediately in that way that you do when you've knocked back a few and were comparing pulling stories. Yeah, picked him up in a bar in Soho. God, he was gorgeous. Took him back to mine and ended up playing strip poker. Every girl loves a sailor, Benny slurred. We raised our bottles of cider and chinked them together. So, I continued, he was down to his boxers and I was in my bra and knickers and we were on to our second bottle of tequila. Tequila! Benny raised her bottle again and I clinked mine with it. And there we were, absolutely hammered when... I laughed. When my son walked in. No way! Benny was crying with laughter. Yeah. There was a pause. I never saw Mikey for 3 months after that. Benny stopped laughing. Oh. Flash! And then I arrived at home. Kensington. I saw myself coming back from a night out, hilarious, famous, absolutely fabulous and simply wonderful Polly Wright. She's still got it. And I saw my son stood at the top of the stairs. I saw Mikey. And for the first time ever, I saw the look in his eyes. God, I'd messed up. Flash! And then I was flying through the vortex once more, all thoughts of dresses and parties forgotten. I could see all the different realities merging, worlds without ice cream, worlds where childhood heroes became characters in porn flicks, worlds where the dinosaurs never died out. Periods shot past me and crashed into each other, and I began to scream over the sound of centuries collapsing. Flash! Aha. And then I found myself here. I assume I buggered up history? Indeed you did. You were manipulated into interfering with a number of nexus points in the history of the planet Earth. Your acceptance of everything you had seen in your travels with the Doctor made you the perfect choice. Who did all this? We do not know, but we shall find out. Oh yes, we shall. Can you put things back to normal? Yes, but we only have 24 hours to save the Earth. At midnight, this planet will be pulled inside out. It's currently fluctuating between different histories, different realities, different pasts, different tenses. But you'll be able to sort it out. I can't, but I know a man who can, one of our best agents. And what will happen to me? We'll send you back. Once history has been repaired, you'll remember some of it, but only as a dream. Oh? That makes you sad? You'd rather Earth and consequently the universe was destroyed? No, darling, of course not. It's just... Oh, I don't know. You're not happy? Flash! Saviour of the universe. And Polly Wright dreams of the Doctor as he's sent to tidy the mess she's made of history. And she dreams of her son. And she dreams of the one man she ever truly loved. Awake, my sleeping beauty, whispers his voice as he gently kisses me on the lips. I open my eyes and look up at him. Ben, I whisper. His face creases up as he smiles down at me. All right, Duchess. Oh, Ben, I cry as I sit up and hug him. He laughs as he tries to speak. You had some kind of breakdown. Somebody told me you needed the kiss of life. He pulls away and I ask him where we are. An old mate of ours sneaked you out the Abbey. And then our old mate comes into the room. His hair is greyer. Other than that, he looks exactly the same as he had done in the 60s. Hello, Polly, he smiles. Good to see you. The Doctor scampers towards me and kisses me lightly on the forehead. How are you? The wonderful smile is replaced by a look of concern. We've all been terribly worried, you know. I'm fine, I say. I understand. I really understand. And with that, I begin to laugh. That night, I celebrate the end of the millennium with my oldest friends. We're in an old house that belongs to the Doctor. It's miles from London and the industry, and for that I couldn't be happier. It isn't just Ben and the Doctor. Jamie is there too. Sweet, innocent Jamie. We drink gallons of 66 Sauvignon. We all agree that it had been a very good year. And we eat a wonderful meal made by the Doctor himself. We tell stories and sing songs. I tell them tales of my life in show business. The Doctor and Jamie tell us stories of their life acting as agents for the Doctor's people. I'm not the only one who's changed. Ben tells us of his life running a pub in Sydenham. And because of their normality, I think his stories are my favourite. We drink more wine and sing more songs. Jamie teaches us how to do the Highland Fling, and Ben surprises us all with a wonderful operatic singing voice. We even play hide and seek. Imagine 4 weary middle-aged friends playing hide and seek. And we reminisce about the time we'd spent travelling together. Not the bad times, but the good. Ben and I pillow fighting on the Galaxian, the weekend we'd spent on Oaks Minor, our visit to Venus. So many good times. The memories play in my mind like rose-tinted slow-motion flashbacks. Louis Armstrong begins to sing on the doctor's old gramophone player and we all fall quiet. Staring into my glass, I feel the night, the year, the century, the millennium drawing to an end. The doctor, sensing the mood, takes Jamie outside to see the stars. Ben reaches over to me and gently squeezes my arm. "You okay, Paul?" he asks. "I'm fine, it just feels like it's all over. We don't have all the time in the world, do we? We're old. We're all grown up. It's too late for dreams to come true." I become silent as I stare into the glowing embers of the dying fire. "How's your wife?" I ask. She's gone." Ben looks uncomfortable. Then we're both silent. Then we both try and speak at the same time. Then we're both silent again. Then we both laugh. "Polly?" "Yes, Ben?" "I love you." "Ben?" "Yes, Paul?" "I've been waiting years for you to say that." And as Louis growls out the final verse, we kiss. And outside there are no fireworks, just the orange ribbons of sunlight streaking across the purple sky, signalling the dawn of a new day, of a new age. The end of one story, and the beginning of another.